Muddler Minnow, which is one of my favorite streamers. I mean, the Muddler Minnow, I don't really think it's an eastern fly. You find them everywhere and used anywhere. But a really effective fall, spring, summertime. I don't really think there's a time when big fish aren't eating minnows, unless there aren't any around and they're on the hatch. But one of my all-time favorite streamers. I don't weight them, no lead wire, no bead heads. If I need to get it down, I use a split, a sink tip, a sinking line if I was on a lake. I find if you weight a streamer, especially a bait fish imitation, you don't get that natural motion in the water that you want, right? Bait fish don't dive down to the bottom when they're running away from something. They swim up. So if you have it weighted and you're constantly fighting it up, you're not really getting it. If you think about a crankbait, you know, that the bass pros use, those float. It's a swimming motion that brings them down. When they stop them, they float back up, and that's where the strike usually occurs, is when they start to float a little bit up. So that was the kind of thing I was trying to imitate with my bait fish streamers. I wanted them, when I was pulling them with that split shot, to sink a little bit, and when I stopped, I wanted that deer hair head to pop it back up. So I tend to tie them with a really dense head on them to help me give me that flotation. Fish you could float on the surface if you want, Vince. I mean, you know, we could call it a caddis if you want. You could fish. You sure?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So for this one, I'm going to use a size 6 mustad. I've tied these as big as size 2. I've tied them down to size 12. Just depends on the water that I'm fishing. But size 6 was, at least for me, the most effective size, especially in the spring and fall. So again, we'll just start tying thread. I start the tying thread basically where the back of my head's going to be, just to give me a visual mark for where I'm going to end my body materials. Now for the tail, I'm going to use red wool, just regular old craft wool that I'm pretty sure I stole out of my grandmother's knitting kit many, many years ago. Got my bag of wools. But just cut off a stretch. When I tie it in, I want to tie my wool the entire length of the shank of the hook, because I'm going to use a flat mylar tinsel body. And mylar is a bit of a finicky material. If you don't have your level body, it's going to kink and curl and turn and look kind of bad on you. So anything I tie in at the tail, same thing if I'm tying the traditional pattern with the turkey quill tail, I'll tie the butts of that turkey quill the length of the body just to keep that uniform shape. It's also going to help me build up a little bit of bulk in the body. For the new tyers in the room, if you watch YouTube videos, guys like Kelly Gallup, some of the real big streamer guys out there tying flies, they talk about bulk all the time with their streamers. And I wish they wouldn't, because it's not really the right term. We're not trying to build bulk, we're trying to build profile, right? When you're adding bulk to the fly, you make the fly heavier, it's more material to hold water, which makes it miserable to cast, which is why a lot of guys don't like fishing streamers, because trying to hurl around a size 4 or a size 2 on a little 5-weight rod can be a bit of a pain if you're just learning out how to cast. So I try to use the term profile, because that's really what we want to do. We want to build the profile of a bait fish. And as much as possible, I try to use water-resistant materials. Anybody who's pike fish has been throwing double bunnies around all day knows how much fun that can be. I've never used them for pike, but I've used an awful lot of them for striped bass fishing on the Shubenacadie River system in Nova Scotia. After about an hour, you kind of got to go sit down, have a drink of rum or coffee, whatever your preference, and rest your arm a little bit. So before I go any further, I want to brush that tail out a little bit, because it's still all knotted up. You do it with your fingers or with a bodkin, or you can go into your makeup kit, or your girlfriend's or your wife's or your sister's makeup kit, and steal one of these nice little brushes.
You can borrow it out of Vince's.
Or you can borrow it out of Vince's. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than buying the commercially sold tools for the same purpose. The only problem with them is they are plastic and they don't stand up so well, so eventually you will tear the head off. But that's all you really want anyways.
You've been overcharging these guys?
Well, I also grew up in a town that had one fly shop that had a monopoly on material, so everything cost a fortune. So we got pretty good at creating our own stuff. My first hair stacker was a 16 gauge shotgun shell stuffed inside a 12 gauge shotgun shell. It did the trick. But if you really want to weird somebody out, invite them down in your dark basement and watch you tie flies. Take out a shotgun shell and start banging it on the desk.
Hey, I like that.
Pretty soon around town you're known as the weirdo redneck.
Yeah, never thought of that. That's a good idea. Yeah, to get the guys out of your basement now.
So we've got that all pulled out nice and big. I really love, on any of my bait fish imitations, I try to have red somewhere, be it the tail, somewhere around the gills. It just, I don't know if it triggers that strike or if it's mostly in my head, but I found it really makes a difference. So we've just got some large flat mylar tinsel, double-sided, gold on one, silver on the other. For this one we're going to tie it with a gold body, so we'll tie it gold side down because it's going to fold over on itself. We'll just advance the tying thread up to where we're going to stop our body, and we'll wrap the tinsel. Keep a lot of pressure on it. As I said, there is a little bit of stretch, and that stretch will help you overcome some of the kinks in it. Just work our way forward. Just because I'm a newfie, do it goofy
I
style.
was just going to say, just about everybody that comes from down east does that.
It's just goofy style.
Gary Fraser.
So no, there's no technical reason, Dave. It's just
You mean as far as wrapping away from you versus coming over the hook towards you, or vice versa?
It's, what he's doing is actually, the correct term is reverse wrap.
Yep.
So it's like he says, it's a new thing, it's contrary to what the problem sometime will arise when he goes to tie off. If you're used to it, it's not a problem, but if you're not used to it, you will push the material back the way it came. And with Mylar, it just goes whoosh.
which is why you develop a neat little knot trick to get around that.
There you go. Salmon fly tires know how to reverse tying thread.
So I've got it up to just where I stop my tying thread, and this is where we deal with our counter wrap. I'm going to take 1/2 wrap on the angle, so my tying thread is going to come up, and at one time it's going to wrap the last wrap I made and my excess. Trap them both in, and I'm done. We'll just secure that down. We're done. So now we're going to put in the wing. Now, when I first started tying this fly, I was using a calf tail or a bucktail wing, which just created way too much bulk at the head, where I then had to spin deer hair around. And then I came across this great little synthetic thing. Some stores call it polar hair, streamer hair. I've seen it under a whole bunch of names. It's just a synthetic craft wool, really. Golden retriever fur works really well too. Just don't let her know you're coming with scissors. I'm fairly confident I'm the reason my parents can't take their dog to the groomers anymore. Gets all nervous every time he sees scissors. So we're just going to take a bunch. We're not going to worry about stacking or evening up tips because we're going to do that with our scissors. We're just going to hold it on top, use a pinch wrap, keep it on top of the shank. Real nice, very tight thread wraps. And we'll just back our thread right up to where the tinsel stops. Trim our excess. And then I'm going to build that comb right back down to the shank of the hook, which is just going to help me when I tie my deer hair in.
Does the transition have to be smooth for deer hair?
It doesn't have to be smooth. The easier you make it, the better it will, because when you're spinning your hair, you won't suddenly have a drop off down, because that can build up a gap in your hair. So I mean, you can see not too well, but it's by no means a perfect bullet head for finishing off a streamer, but there's enough there that it's going to give me something to bite onto as I go down. So we're going to take our streamer hair. Once again, we're going to get our trusty comb out and just give it a little brush just to open everything up. The other good thing about brushing is it's going to let you know if you tied it in tight enough, because once you start pulling it, if you didn't, it'll just pull out. And it's a lot less embarrassing for it to pull out when it's just you on the vise in the basement than when you're in the water and all your friends are watching your trophy cast to that fish you saw. Yeah, never looks good when you've been bragging about these flies you tie and everybody watches the material float down the river.
If they're good friends, they won't say anything.
You have much better friends than I have.
They'd be throwing the flies and gave them out.
So, and then I just trim it so it's more or less even with my tail. No real big fancy haircut, just a little bit of an angle, because that's about all you're going to see once we get our collar tied on there. So that's the only part that really matters. So now we're going to move on to our collar. Before I get too far into spinning deer hair, a few notes on spinning deer hair. And sorry to rehash this for some of the more experienced guys in the room, but we got a couple beginners, so good time. One of the most important things, I think the most important thing, is to have good quality deer hair. Nice and coarse. You don't want fine stuff like you'd use for tying a compare-done wing. You want it, the coarser the better, preferably without a whole lot of fluff or down underneath of it. If you can get somebody who deer hunts and hits the spring velvet hunt in Saskatchewan, that's the hair you want. That stuff is absolutely awesome. If you know guys that hunt deer by accident in the spring in northern Maine, that's good stuff to get too. Those accidental deer have tremendous pelts. Tremendous pelts. So the other thing too is, you know, you can find on the market now all sorts of threads, right? The Kevlar, gel spun, all that stuff. It's all real good, except for Kevlar. It's really awesome for bulletproof vests, and it should probably stay there. I find Kevlar thread is too thick. It's okay if you're tying great big bass poppers or pike flies where you got lots of room to work with, but when you're dealing with something this small or even smaller bass bugs, it's just too thick a thread to use. Some of the newer stuff is getting a little bit thin, but it's still too big. Gel spun is great. It'll let you tie real tight, but you don't really need it. You know, 6/0 thread will take a lot of pressure. Where most people are breaking the thread, especially when they're spinning deer hairs, they're not keeping even tension all the way around. You've got even tension to here, and as you drop around the backside, you're slacking off and tightening again, and it's that snap that's breaking the thread. If you put a little bit of time and effort into developing that skill set to keep even pressure all the way around, one, you'll spin deer hair every bit as good as the guys on YouTube and the guys who are tying for the shops, and you'll break a lot less thread and save yourself a couple pennies. You won't have to go buy that. I don't even know what gel spun's going for. When I first started tying, it was like $6 a spool, which is way too much money for a spool of tying thread that you only use to tie 5 or 6 patterns in your arsenal, in my opinion. So we'll get on with the spinning of the deer hair. I'm going to take a clump. Anytime, the way I was taught is spinning deer hair is like building a campfire. If you think you have enough firewood, go out and get twice as much more. And that's sort of the same rule that applies to spinning deer hair, especially when you do your collar. I like to start with really just an obscene amount of hair. Really about that much. See, it's quite a sizable chunk. I'm going to trim that off. And then we're just going to brush all the little fluff and crud and miscut clipped feathers out of the bottom, because we don't want that to get in our way when we're spinning. Now for the collar, we're going to stack it up. So we'll put it in our hair stacker. First time I ever saw, I went to a demo to see flies tie. Warren Dunk was tying. He's a guy from St. John, New Brunswick. And Dunk was an incredible tyer, but he never used a hair stacker. He evened everything with his fingers. He was absolutely incredible at it. Calf-tail, bucktail, I can see doing fingers. How you stack a whole pile of deer hair with your hands is beyond me. I've tried vainly to learn and abandon the practice. Gone back to my hair stacker. So we've got our tips fairly evenly stacked. So what we're going to do with our fingers is we're just going to set the size of the collar we want. So I like to set the collar about 3/4 of the way, not 3/4 of the way down the hook shank, but 3/4 of the way down the body that we've built. Right about there. I'm just going to use my finger to press it down and basically spin it by hand around the shank. For the collar, we don't want to spin the deer hair just yet. We want to tie the collar in place more or less where we want it. So one loose wrap, then we're going to tighten it up before we put that second wrap on. And a second wrap. And now we're really going to put 2 or 3 very tight wraps. So we've got our collar in place. We're going to brush back our hair, and we're going to put a few wraps through that, just like we were spinning it. A few little scissor wraps. And then we're going to pack that back. What that's going to do is help you when you trim it, because it's going to have those butts standing up from your collar, so when you go through your scissors you don't finish trimming it and realize you've cut all your deer hair and your collar off. It's also going to help you keep those butts out of the collar, and you can get that real nice tip collar that you see at the stores and online. Now, you can buy a hair stacker. You can pull the ink out of a Bic pen and use the shell of the pen to do it. I just like to use my fingers. One less tool to deal with. And you don't really need to pack your deer hair that tight. One of the things I found when I started using a packer was I was using twice as much deer hair as I used to. The flies didn't look any better. I was just using twice as much material. So I just use my thumb and forefinger. So we'll cut another patch off, again, about as equally as big. Give her a little brush. And this time we're going to clip the tips out of it. Save ourselves a little bit of time on the back end. We're going to cut them out anyway, so we might as well get rid of them now. So what I'm left with is basically just the butts of the deer hair. We use pinch wrap again. One loose wrap. Second one a little bit tighter, and now we're going to start spinning that hair around, keeping lots and lots of tension on that tying thread. And then just thumb and forefinger, we're just going to push that back. And when you're pushing it back, you want to use your other thumb and forefinger and put it right in. You feel your way into the base of your collar and just push it back to there. Then one smaller clump up front, just to fill out the head. And we'll just spin this last one in. Same again, pinch wrap, loose wrap, tight wrap. Let it spin. And just push it back. Give ourselves a little bit of room to tie off on. Pull that hair. Let's see if I can get my hand out of the way. So just a few little wraps to finish, sweeping those butts back because we don't want to tie them up in our head. And whip finish to start. Now the fun part, the haircut. I don't spend a whole lot of time fussing and clipping and worrying about having the head perfect, but I do take a few seconds and just try to get all those butts standing more or less straight up and down. So we got a great big mess there. Just put the scissors in, basically flat on top. I can move the bicycle right here, sorry folks. Scissors right in, basically on the same angle as the eye of the hook, right up through, one snip, and then just continue that shape and profile all the way around. I cut the bottom a little flatter, almost like a sculpin pattern, just because I find that pulls through the water much nicer. But again, you can use a cone head, a bubble head, whatever your preferred shape is. And there's any number of ways to do this. You can use a razor blade, scissors, lighters. It's a neat, nifty little trick if you can figure it out. Just a quick little pass and it'll burn itself down. Works better with moose hair than deer hair.
Get you kicked out of the house.
Yeah, it will. Burnt moose hair smells like something truly awful.
Yeah.
Truly awful. And I'm pretty sure my grandfather only told me that because he knew I wasn't doing it in his house. But it does work. I'll just snip a few of these. And there we go. This is not quite in focus. So we've got that bullet head that's going to give us that dip and swiggle.